radio moments. And today, our radio moment will be coming from Bob Friedman. Now, Bob Friedman worked as an operations manager and talk show host for Birmingham's WJLD AM until his retirement in 2011. He's also the founder of the Birmingham Black Radio Museum, which will cover the long history of Black radio in Magic City from the 1930s to the 1980s, the heyday of AM radio. Please join me in welcoming Bob Friedman.
Thank you, Alex. And you know, this room has great, what's the word? Thank you, acoustics. I don't even know if can you hear me in the back? Yes. Really nice. However, for our live folks at home, I'm going to start with something that was produced for the bicentennial. I was asked to do something, and I was also asking to do something with that committee back in 2017, 2018 or so. And it's just a little, about a 2.25 minute thing I threw together at home to give people a blitz understanding that the concept and the history of Black radio in Birmingham was not just a couple of folks, but something much more widespread than that permeated into its own community, because these folks went home at the end of the day. So, Zach, if you'll roll that, we can move on. Made sound. Not really good without sound. Okay. You might want to put the kibosh on that, Zach, until we get the sound right. No. Got to start from the beginning, too. Does it work if I do this?
Not quite that high tech.
Sing for us. Oh, you know that I sing because I'm happy, and I sing because I'm free. Let me tell you, I sang with Don in his later life. But you didn't come here to hear me sing. I can tell you what you're looking at. We'll come back to this. And while he's getting his stuff together, the top row are students that came out of two places, the School of Library and Information Studies, ta-da, and my friend Pam King's history class at UAB, ta-da. And these are students who actually came to WJLD or to the Carver and did digitizing and transcribing of oral histories that I had done with various people, absolutely not knowing what I was doing, to make that very, very plain. This was feeling my way. There were a lot of interviews where I would simply say, so did you know so-and-so? So did so-and-so work here? So what do you remember about so-and-so? And meanwhile, I'm interviewing this fella or this woman, but I'm trying to understand Birmingham. I'd only been there about 2 or 3 years. I had no idea the history of Black radio. Well, these wonderful young people volunteered via Bob Ryder, who's director of archival studies at UA, to come all the way to Birmingham and all the way to the Carver in the African-American community, where we could lunch and we can go from storefront to storefront, and they could watch through the portholes and see people rehearsing their plays. Ah, that's my cue. Yes?
Listen up, radio is on the air. Black Radio, 81 years in Birmingham, saluting the bicentennial of the state of Alabama. The Birmingham Black Radio Museum captures the history of black radio, from format to ownership, and archives through oral history and ephemera. The personalities and their activities, delivering the news and making the news. It's 1938. It's William Blevins, the Blevins aggregation, on the early WSGN 610 gospel broadcast. The 1940s brings us Bob Umbach and the Atomic Boogie Hour on WJLD 1400, race music and jazz. W.A. Clark, Deacon Richmond Davis, Truman Puckett, and the extraordinary Jefferson County a cappella gospel quartets. The 1950s brings us Wiley Daniels, Midnight Mover Groover Walter Anglin, and Eddie Castleberry, personality leaders on WEDR 1220. William and Erskine Foch with gospel on WBCO 1450. Your Roberta Rowland, Robelia Pope, Honey Brown, and Laura Gary, women, cooking, and jazz. Sugar Daddy Dawkins and Johnny Jive, Bruce Payne, Willie McKinstry, and Shelley the Playboy Stewart, rock and roll, the engine slamming into civil rights with Tall Paul White, Thin Man Maurice King on WENN 1320. All this before FM was really in the market, a mere fraction of the voices that carried the gospel and the rhythm and blues, as Fred and Martin and the community brought us from a mighty long way. The Birmingham Black Radio Museum, a community-based archive built by and for our community and beyond by folks who came up and came by, proudly celebrating our state's bicentennial.
So, are you now all changed? Did you change a little bit? That was for the bicentennial, and also for whenever I get a chance to do what I'm doing today, because I think it explains something, that in a small state and a poor state, there were so many people who were moving around black radio. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. In New York City, where I grew up, I was born in 1943. By the time the 50s rolled around, and rock and roll was a big deal in New York, there were 5 stations on television that had bandstands, 5 at the same time. 5 stations, including one out of Newark called Jocko's Rocket Ship Show. And Jocko Henderson came out of Baltimore and eventually started a television show, an all-black television show, a bandstand with black kids dancing, black performers that piped right into New York City. It was huge. E-titty, well, the hold is a jock, and I'm back on the scene with the record machine saying, "Oh, Papa do, and how do you do?" He had us, completely had us. He was the best. You heard of Alan Freed, those who are old enough to remember, but nobody was like Jocko Henderson. So I started singing that kind of music in about 59 or 60 with vocal groups. Street corner harmony was done predominantly by black groups. That's what you heard. By the time the late 50s had come about, rock and roll was accepted and made its move across the race line pretty much everywhere. Black vocal groups, loved by teenagers of all colors and backgrounds. Something about the sound, it was just different, how they made harmony together. Along the way, I left New York for Chicago. I became a community organizer. You don't want to know what a headache trying to organize folks in their own interests. Very, very difficult in America. So I stayed in Chicago for about 10 years and Gary, Indiana for about 4 or 5, building Welfare Mothers organization in both cities that eventually morphed into the Harold Washington campaign for mayor. I don't know how many people are connected to that piece of history, but Harold was extraordinary with the most phenomenal vocabulary I had ever heard. I never heard the word Rubicon before. That's where I heard it, from Harold. And Harold Washington represented his election a tremendous change in Chicago, which was run by criminals, period. The Democratic Party of Chicago was criminal. And they had, and assisting them, the Mafia, the Ku Klux Klan, the Jesus People USA, the Skinheads, early beginning of the Moonies, Some Young Moon. This is all incredibly reactionary people. And in the midst of all that, an enormous grassroots movement in the second largest city in the United States, where the head of the Democratic Party put out a flyer that said, make no mistake about it, race is the issue. And when he won the Democratic primary, the entire Democratic Party shifted to the Republican Party. And they ran a nobody who put on television, vote Epton before it's too late. The second largest city in the United States, 1983. What I can say to you, and I'll end that little chapter of my life, the vocal group that I was singing with in Chicago that was doing shows, Yesterday's Rhythm, some of which you can see on YouTube, sang at Harold's inauguration. What a thrill. I'm a lucky guy. I'm a lucky guy for the things I've seen. And I came south from Chicago in 1987 to work on the independent presidential campaign of Dr. Lenora B. Fulani, the first woman and the first African-American ever to get on the ballot for president in all 50 states and the District of Columbia, and the first Black woman ever to receive federal primary matching funds. It was a great campaign, worked in 10 states, knocked on doors, raised money, met all kinds of people. One of my friends knocked on Walter Mondale's door and he slammed the door in his face. But you know, those kind of things happen. I had a better experience. I met one of the original miracles in Detroit, fell down on my knees and started salaming to him. Anyway, after the campaign, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I didn't want to go back to Chicago. It was too damn cold. And New York, So what could I do? I'd like to do a 1950s rhythm and blues review show. I knew the groups, I knew the songs, da-da-da-da-da-da, seemed like a natural. Nobody in radio was interested in hiring me. And I went to the Black stations first. When I got to Birmingham, there were 5 Black stations in this city. Now, New York never had 5, but there were 5 Black stations in Birmingham, Alabama. And one man, Gary Richardson, who's still on the air, he may not want me to say this, but I started his talk show in 1989, and then he came and did a better job. And he's still on the air. He bought the station in 87. I was 14 years older than him. You think I might have had a father complex going there? But it made a big difference. I couldn't believe it. I was in radio, and about maybe 3 or 4 months later, I convinced him to give me a show where I was going to play the 1950s rhythm and blues. And he did. This is how cautious he was. He gave me 10:30 to midnight on Sunday. I guess he knew something I didn't know. But I had a cult following. The problem is that vocal group harmony is a big city phenomenon. It's not to say there aren't vocal groups came out of Birmingham. I know you can't think of one that came out of Montgomery. That's pretty hard. but everybody thinks about the Temptations. A couple of them came out of Birmingham. 3 more came out of Detroit. And there were groups like the Five Owls, and I'm serious. There was some small groups, rare records. Kevin knows what I'm talking about. So it wasn't street. I used to kid. This is when I was somewhat obnoxious and would talk about the South like, well, in order to do doo-wop, you needed to have sidewalks and lampposts, and there aren't any down here. And that's an awful thing to say. God, how could he say such a thing? But anyway, I learned. And that radio station, even though that was short-lived, I realized that we needed a talk show. I realized that, without really knowing the history, and not that well-versed in the civil rights history either, that the community needed a sounding board. There had to be some kind of interaction made possible by radio. I knew we had it in Chicago very minimally. And when I was in Gary doing grassroots work and getting handcuffed here and there in welfare centers, I can still remember on a white station, okay, we're about to go on the air, Mr. Friedman. You ready to talk about the Lake County Coalition for Survival? Yes, I am. I'm absolutely ready. Okay, and you're on. So, Mr. Friedman, tell us about being a communist. Well, I hadn't counted on that. I was totally naive to the notion that that's really what I was being set up for, and that's what radio could do. They could set the agenda. Okay. So along comes the 50th anniversary of WJLD, 1992. And I felt, having been there for 3 years, but also being kind of a community organizer, I like to make flyers, like to kind of put stuff out. Gary, we got to do something. It's the 50th anniversary. Hey, well, go ahead, Bob, do what you the thing about Gary is that he was a radio electronics engineer, and he was brilliant as a kid. You know what this kid used to do? He grew up poor. His town in Walker County doesn't exist anymore. It's just kudzu. But when he was a kid, he and his little friend, Robert, used to go to dumps and take apart televisions and stuff that was like thrown away and just put a charge on it and see what would happen. Eventually, he got the brilliant idea to take the spark plug out of a lawnmower and attach a long wire to it and throw it in the stream and pull the cord. And all these dead turtles came up and stuff like that. This was the beginning of a brilliant man who is now the mayor of Midfield, the head of technology services for the Bessemer school system, and the owner of about 4 different radio stations. But this is how I met him. He was 31, I was 44. And for that 50th anniversary program, I also had a microphone because I had by then a Saturday morning show, and I went on the air saying, we're looking to learn more about our history. And old announcers came in. And I hope I'm giving any of you who are hungry to fill up your archival warehouse with what you have to do, really. I mean, just don't leave any stone unturned. And certainly if they give you a mic, start talking before they turn it off. What can you tell me out there? And old announcers came in with scrapbooks. And that just blew my mind. And why wouldn't they have scrapbooks? Why, if you're interested in something, eventually you kind of collect stuff around it. And they had pictures of them and pictures of stars and pictures of other announcers and pictures of radio stations long gone. You saw William Blevins on the early video. This guy, he worked for the Birmingham News. How did he get a radio show working for the Birmingham News in 1931, 32, right in the heart of the Depression. Somehow, and that's the wonderful thing, these are absolutely unpredictable. He was given a 15-minute program. What did he do during that 15 minutes? He would sing. Then he would tell people where he would be that week at various churches. Then he would sing something else. Then he would talk about something else. And 15 minutes was up. But what did the community get out of it? They knew where it was going to be. They knew there was going to be a meeting. They knew there was going to be music. And he began to move people in a serious way for about 15 years doing that. To the point where A.G. Gaston, the renowned millionaire from Birmingham, who passed at the age of 104, and whose motto was find the niche and fill it. So he had a burial company, he had an insurance company, and eventually he had a bank, because it wasn't owned by anybody else that would service the African-American community, right? He became one of his sponsors in 1938. Don Solomon was a minister for years in Birmingham. He was our first tenor in the Pillars. We had a gospel quartet, an a cappella gospel quartet. And I was the bass. So eat your heart out. Are there any basses out there? Oh, see what I mean? It's still there. This is Leroy Garrett, who managed this group, the Heavenly Four, in 1944. That's this picture, is 1944. Leroy Garrett used to provide linen to WVOK, a 50,000 watt AM white station in Birmingham that at night could be heard in Los Angeles. It was a bowling ball, and nothing was in its way frequency-wise, and it could reach Los Angeles. Leroy provided linen and napkins. He had a cleaning service right down there in Titusville on 6th Avenue. And he was managing that group. And he brought that group to WVOK, and he integrated WVOK on Sunday. The Heavenly Four were the first Black group to be on WVOK's airwaves. Leroy said, I like this radio stuff, and went to Huntsville, and in a trailer started the first Black-owned station in the state of Alabama, WEUP. A very simple set of slogans followed that. We up, you up. Everybody knew that in Huntsville. Black, white, didn't matter. 1600 AM. He learned, and Don, who kind of followed Leroy, said he wasn't very literate, but he knew what he wanted to do. And he knew what needed to be done. And Leroy became the owner of WEUP. Actually went to the FCC, argued that certain things were right or wrong about the application process. This was 1958 in Huntsville. Big cotton town, pretty much. Sleepy little cotton town with a few, what were they, immigrants from Germany? I forgot who they were, immigrants from Germany. Yeah, they were just immigrants, right? Excuse me. Oh, sometimes I break into that, but I'm cleansed, okay? Anyway, look at how happy he is. You know what he's doing? There's another picture of Andrew Sugar Daddy Dawkins selling Manischewitz wine. Don't you think that hit me? That was Pesach, Passover. That's the only kind of wine you would have at a Seder if you were, hello, am I reaching anybody out here? You know what I'm talking about, right? So he was advertising it on the radio. He had promotional pictures of himself pouring Manischewitz wine. It's an interesting thing about Black folks and Jewish folks, their connections and their relationships in Birmingham, probably other places too. That's a whole other story. This man was ending his career at WJLD when I got there. Does anybody in the audience know who he is? Oh, okay. So I'm earning my fee. This is Paul, Tall Paul White. Now, does anybody know that name? Yeah? What, was I yelling it in your ear or something? I mean,
Well, I've heard you speak with Dr. Rogers' class at UA. So.
oh, okay. That's good answer. Paul was born in 1936 in Titusville in Birmingham. And Paul went with Leroy to WEUP, but not after his mother had taken him all over the South at the age of 4 or 5 to do evangelism. His mother and her group of evangelists show up in the movie that starred Peter Fonda. What was it? Motorcycle movie. Louder. Easy Rider. His mother and her 2 cohorts on the guitar show up on Bourbon Street for like that. And Paul was taken by his mother around Virginia, the Virginias, both of them, West and Average, and Arkansas, Louisiana, evangelizing. That's what she did. So right away, he was outside of Birmingham. When he came back to Birmingham, he went to Rosedale, and his records, just before he gets inducted into the Army and goes to Germany for 2 years, comes back, the records from Rosedale, which we were able to get, list that he's interested in radio announcing. And it's an amazing thing when you're doing archival work, and this has something to do with community-based archiving. And maybe some of you are wondering when I'm going to get to that point, but I think you can see it in some way. I think this is a good graphic to talk about community-based archiving, from what students have done to public programs and making collaboration and corroboration. Collaboration is great fun. That's why I'm here. I love ADAH. I love the staff. I love so many people here. It's a great place. It's a wonderful gift to the state of Alabama. But corroboration can, make you some enemies, Jack, depending on what you're saying about what did happen or what didn't happen. And I've had my share of that. That's okay. History will out. So anyway, Paul eventually is so powerful at A&M, because was up in Huntsville. A&M was broadcasting football games. He was an absolute A when it came to being a broadcaster and having knowledge, so much knowledge of the game. He was 6'5" also, and a boxer. We have a wonderful picture of him in trunks. That the folks at Miles College at Birmingham wanted him in Birmingham, and they organized and paid and did whatever they had to do. And Paul came down in 1961 to do sports and news on Shelley the Playboy's morning show at WENN Radio, WENN. And for a number of reasons, Shelley had to leave that station and go all the way up on Red Mountain, JLD. That was the primary competitor. There was all AM. We're not talking FM at all. The FM is passe. Is it not passe, but it's immaterial. For one thing, you had to have an FM receiver. And JLD, where I worked, Also had a partner station, WJLN, in 1948. But all they would do was simulcast. They would play the same thing on AM, on FM. They didn't have to have a separate staff. Sometimes if a station had to go off at sundown because of its licensing requirements, the FM would carry on. But FM wasn't the connection to the community. It was AM, pretty solidly for the huge and tumultuous times in Birmingham. So Paul takes over Shelley Stewart's morning show after only doing news and sports. And guess what? That's what he considered his forte. That's his language. News and sports, that was my forte. And if you read more about Paul White, you'll learn that he had positions on things like the economy of Birmingham, youth and crime, whether or not the black business community was going to further itself. He would write about it. He would be interviewed around those subjects in the Birmingham Times. It's just unusual. So then come the tumultuous days of the 1960s, 63 to be exact. Paul's at WENN Radio, when all of the movement is taking place, where D-Day is taking place, and students are coming out of their classrooms, and thousands of students are filling up Kelly Ingram Park, and paddy wagons, and hoses, and dogs, and Bull Connor, and all of it. By the way, if you want to know anything about Bull Connor or reference, I would invite you to meet my dear friend, Pam King, who's written extensively about Bull Connor. And I'm glad that she's here, and you should be glad too. So, the students leave Ullman one day. Now, how did they know to leave? The stories that you will get is that, and these are from radio announcers, I played this record and they began to march. I told them it was time to leave their school. You know, those kind of statements. Ridiculous. We're talking about something I learned in my later life, the difference between the North and the South is that it was the law down here, Jack. I mean, they may do racial things in Bensonhurst or in Chicago or another place that I'm aware of. But in the South, it was the law. They had the law behind them. The laws behind them. That's a big deal. So doesn't it make sense that if somebody's on the air saying, okay, children, it's time to move, what's going to happen to him? The same thing that happened to other people in Birmingham. And people weren't saying that. So how did the word get out? Why did all those kids come at the same time? And I spoke to James Bevel's daughter recently. You know James Bevel, who was given the leadership to reach those young people and get them fired up and ready to go when Martin had done everything pretty much he could do. And she said it was a movement of faith. It was a movement of faith. People left where they were, did what they felt they had to do, but faith played a role in it. Am I going to say anything well, yeah, I think that's probably true. I'm sure it was a component. But what also happened was that it was a military operation with people who were giving instructions, meetings that were being held at various churches and surreptitiously all around the city, who you were to look for at the school, who was going to come to the school, who was assigned early on to come to your school. That's who you look for outside. When you see that sign saying it's time, you get up and you leave. Who's going to leave? Not everybody. Which teachers are going to turn their back and make believe they don't see it? Not every teacher. This was still tough to pull off. It's an amazing feat that a nonviolent movement did what it did in Birmingham. An amazing feat. And so in Ullman, one of our friends, Gwen Sanders Gamble, and her two sisters were attending. She was 14. Gwen, what was your role in the movement? I was a recruiter when I was 14. My job was to make sure that when we got the word from Meatball outside, that we were ready to go. And so me and my two sisters, and we left. And we left Ullman. This is all in the Birmingham Black Radio Museum interviews, by the way. And immediately the police saw us and we started running. How many people have been to Birmingham? Just a show of hands real quick. Okay. So you know if you're running from the south side to the north side, you're gonna run smack dab into 2059 going right across. Now picture, I mean, I don't know, you might remember. You remember before 2059? Imagine just fields and small houses. It's not there, it's 1963. People are running from Ullman, which is a building, right? At UAB, Ullman High School. To where are they gonna run? They're gonna run towards the 16th Street Baptist Church. They're gonna run towards the staging areas. They're gonna run towards the A.G. Gaston Motel. And Gwen and her two sisters started running. And they ran to WENN Radio. And Paul, back in those days, you did 2 shifts. You know, if you were the important ones, the full-timers in radio. You had a morning shift, you had an evening shift, came back at the end of the day. Sometimes when Paul was on the air telling those kids, now you know what you gotta do. You do well in school, you know, work hard. You know, if you decided you were gonna do something, do it right, do it well. That's how he was on the air. He was constantly reinforcing the best behavior of young people, and they could translate out because they saw Paul at meetings when he wasn't on the air, which goes to my next slogan, kill my phone. Which goes to the next slogan is, I think it's in here. Here it is. Don't you hate that one? No, I don't care if my car warranty is worn out. My next slogan is this: art doesn't make the revolution, artists do. That came out of Cuba. It wasn't enough to paint what you were supposed to be doing out there in the fields. It was important to get out in the fields and work. And they ran to WENN Radio. When Paul was on the other, banged on the window. Paul saw them and went like this. They ran to the back door. He led him in the back door and hid 3 people under his desk while he was on the air. And the police came. Looked, they didn't like Paul. They knew he was the one, so to speak. And when it was safe for them to go, they went to the 16th Street Baptist Church. That kind of stuff. So when they attempted to kill King at the A.G. Gaston Motel, the bombing of the A.G. Gaston Motel was such a furious bombing. King was in Atlanta at the time. He wasn't even in the city, but that's what the Klan did. And the concussion of the blast was so bad that a block away, I think it'll behave, a block away, it took out the window at WENN Radio, the front window. Paul lived right across the street from the A.G. Gaston Motel and ran through the window and began broadcasting and was arrested. We have his arrest record. He was kept for a day and a half, and Joe Lackey, who was the general manager, finally, and White, yeah. The whole big story about the WENN staff and Joe Lackey and what happened in 1976 is much later. But That's another time. Invite me down. We'll talk about the WENN radio staff and A.G. Gaston and the whole fight that went down in the city. Those 70s were incredible times. In the 70s, WJLD, where I worked, 1400 AM, had an FM, 104.7. That's become ZZK. For those of you who remember or know about Birmingham radio, it's a big country station, makes millions of dollars. But we owned it at one point in time, and of course the staff approached the ownership of WJLD. And I say we, I mean in the broadest sense of the word, historically. I wasn't there for this, but the black staff approached the Johnston family that owned JLD and said, can we buy 104.7 and make it a black FM? Would have been the first one. And he said no. And the next thing you know, he sold the rights to the corporation that owns and started WZZK. But dig this. During that time, WJLN was just a simulcast station. Like they would rebroadcast WJLD later on at night. And it would reach to Anniston. FM has a big signal. But it was about 25,000 watts at the time. JLD AM was just 1,000 watts. Well, there was this total wild staff that loved Jimi Hendrix and rock music. And there was a brother who was a broadcaster there amongst mostly white broadcasters named Father Tree. I'm sure that doesn't resonate, but Father Tree was very well educated, and he had the chutzpah. Now let's see if my memory is going to work for me. To invite a very famous New York City anti-war poet, Allen Ginsberg. Anybody know that name? No? There you go. Allen Ginsberg, who was an anti-war activist during the Vietnam War, and this is 1972, and he interviewed him on WJLN, and we have the interview. It's an amazing interview. Well, I don't know if I can say some of the words that were in that poem that you're asking me to recite, Father Tree. Oh, don't worry, we play Country Joe and the Fish here. Give me an F, give me a U, and so he went ahead and proceeded to read his poem, which had all kinds of expletives, but it's this kind of mysterious FM story. Okay, I'm being told we're getting close to coffee and donuts or something. But why don't we take some questions? I don't even know if I've gotten close to everything that's up here. But maybe I should just close by saying community-based archiving was a term that was taught to me by Robert Ryder, Dr. Robert Ryder, the person I mentioned who was the head of archival studies at UA. He talked about it. And the two of us actually wrote a paper about it with two of the students that worked with us, two of the students that were in his tutelage at UA, who came to Birmingham and worked with me as transcribers. It was kind of an interesting mix. I don't know how much more I can say, except what this represents is you got to take it out. You got to build with it. You got to be ready for lots of work, because if you want to do community-based archiving, you will learn so much and you will not sleep because you will be so excited about the stuff you learn. Am I right? I mean, it's just like when you were sharing about Native American studies that you were talking about, Alex. It just goes on and on and on. Well, where does this history end? I mean, don't we just want a book that tells us once and for all? Well, that's not what I ended up finding. And like I tried to infer earlier, my training was not in this. I didn't know what a finding aid was, unless it was, like a magnifying glass. I don't know what's a finding aid. So I had to learn. And who did I learn from? I learned from the students over and over and over again. So, okay, take some questions.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. We do have some time for questions. If anyone in the audience has a question, also if you are joining us virtually, you can submit it in the comments and it'll come to my phone and I'll be able to ask on your behalf. Does anyone in our audience have a question?
Yeah, Kev.
There's just something I'm wondering about. Why was Shelley called the Playboy?
Walter Anglin, the Midnight Mover Groover, who was an early broadcaster on WEDR, was a program director for WEDR when Ed Reynolds owned 1220 AM. And what Walter says is that they ran a contest when they finally gave Shelley a regular slot at EDR, which was to the best of my calculations, but from looking at old radio logs, 1955. Shelley says he was on the air in 1949. I disagree. We've had in public yelling matches at each other during presentations around Black history. Yeah, I mean, excuse me, Mr. Friedman. I'm not talking about something I read. I was there. I don't want to go. That's a story on its own. It's a great story. If you approach me later, I'll tell you the story. But anyway, it was supposed to be a contest. And that's where it came from, Shelley the Playboy. Now, there were, I'm not going to say any more than that. That was the substance of your question. Any other questions about?
We have one here. How long was Paul White, how long did he remain on the air in Birmingham?
Paul started his Birmingham career in 1961. He left somewhere in the 80s. He had some health issues, came back, and Gary Richardson hired him in 1987 or 88, a year before I got to JLD. So Paul was there for 4 months when I was there. He was really he had kidney problems and this and that. It was, what I wanted to do was one thing. Paul, let me produce a talk show for you. Let me produce a talk show for you. I mean, I had just gotten mine, about 2 or 3 months after I started. Friedman, I'm not through with it. And he was. And about 2 or 3 months later, he retired, never came back to radio, except in 1999. In 1999, Shelley, to his credit, started talking about older people that were still alive and on the radio. Now, the way he liked to shape it was, who started with me? So, bang, zoom. Anyway, I couldn't stand that because everything had to be about Shelley Stewart. And he said, Paul's going to call in. Paul was in the VA. That's where he lived. He was really in difficult straits. But Paul called in. And as soon as Shelley tried to steer this into everything I did and that you were there, and remember, you began, Paul said, now the way I remember it, and just ran it down. Oh, he ran it down. He taught history. And I remember you had to leave WENN and go to JLD up on the mountain. And how long were you there? 2 years. And then from there, you went to St. Louis. You didn't come back to Birmingham until 68, 69. And then you got in trouble over there. And Shelley, well, it was a long time ago, Paul. I'm not sure about all that, Paul. And it was just, I felt like I was redeemed. It was so important to me that Paul did that. But at the same token, when he left radio, and I was worried for him, I would call him, he would hang up on me. I drove out to his house in Forestdale, And he slammed the door in my face. He was in a wheelchair. I said, let me just take you out in the car. It's a nice day. Get some sun, for crying out loud. But it wasn't to be. Now here's the worst part in the end of this little piece. When I went out to Carver Cemetery and I located Paul's mother and I located Paul's niece and his sister, who had really raised him. And I said, well, show me where Paul's grave is. And the man up on the top level said, that's his head, that's his feet. No marker. I mean, I don't want to use any expletives here, but I've used them plenty. I didn't want to stay in Birmingham at that moment. What kind of city would treat a hero like that? And that's when I called Gary and I said, I've been off the air for quite a number of years. I said, why don't you just give me like one of your morning shows, just 2 hours. So we do the right thing. In 2 hours, an hour and a half really, we raised $3,000 through the door for a stone, which became a bronze with his likeness in it. It says a radio hero on it with his dates. We did an unveiling that CBS covered, and he was finally laid to rest the way he should have been. And when we talk, and Gary and I talked to some other older broadcasters, you think I might use expletives? And the people that they talked about who they knew had the money to take care of Paul, who made WENN, so that, it's all community-based archiving. That, in this case, was quite dramatic since we gave folks from the community a chance to come in and here. It's a marvelous moment. Made me feel like I was, once again, very happy to be in Birmingham. So, anything else? I know it's very dramatic, right? Boy, I should have recorded this and then written the book. Yes, sir.
How did the generational shifts sort of play into the story you're talking about, is sort of the memory of these various DJs through the era? Was that fall off in the memory of Tall Paul partially because of a generational shift that had happened, or was it also because of sort of a change in the focus in media?
Okay, we're going to need some clarification. Okay. So what I'm hearing you ask is, are there different transitions going on at the same time? One which has to do with the media. It's actually a great question, because, and I'll try to answer it, and you can tell me if this is what needs to be done. When you have
Bob, into the microphone.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Could have been worse. You might have been showing me your watch, But anyway, the beginning of having 15 minutes on the air. They used to call it $1 a holler. 15 bucks. That's a lot of money, though. Imagine in the 30s and 40s, maybe you could feed a family for a week. But anyway, from that situation to getting to WEDR, which had a staff where all of a sudden they were on every day, where you had people talking about home economics, recitals on the air, covering sports events, jazz shows. Imagine that. What must the African-American community felt when they heard themselves? And people who sounded like them talked about their neighborhoods, people that they grew up with, to the point where being on an all-black staff station was perfectly okay, made all the sense in the world. So there's a lot of things going on in the country at the same time, right? We're going through the post-Second World War years. The army's getting desegregated. It looks like things are opening up for the community as well. And in Birmingham, and you'll see, this has yet to be written well, I think, but everybody wasn't thrilled that Martin King was coming in. in the Black community. There were people who felt that there was still a fight, a la Booker T. Washington maybe, to develop their thing and compete in the open market as long as a friend of mine, Richard Finley, likes to say, equal justice under the law. That's what they should have settled for, not this little bit of thing called civil rights or, you know, access to the polls and so forth. But under the grounding of equal justice under the law, then they'd be willing to compete at any level. Now, people agree or disagree with that, but, you know, and if you weren't there at the moment to make a decision about what had to be done and where you needed to protest and what have you. But that was also an attitude, and that attitude, there are people who still believe that. So, but there's a transition going on. It's going on in the United States. Kennedy was assassinated. Grassroots organizations all over the country, the Black Panther Party, and more and more possibilities emerging out of the ground. And how can you keep track of that, right? We have, at that point, 200 million people in the country. Well, everybody's thinking and doing and wondering. You know, people are trying to survive and live. I don't think you can plot that kind of stuff. But it made sense eventually for certainly if this is your job description as a broadcaster, you had to ask yourself at one point in time, how come I can't sell my show? I'm the one making the money for the station. But there was a time until the late 70s where they had a white staff that would do the sales work. How do you move from there? If you can get over that, ownership ain't that far away. You know, is it possible? Will bankers lend you the money? Do you have to leave the city entirely to actually be successful at starting your own station? So that's, I guess, part of what we're talking about here in terms of these kinds of shifts. I thought you were going to get more into talking about perhaps rap and the next generation and how the new community relates to Black radio. And I really, I'm at that point, it's on my phone. It's on your phone. I mean, here's news for you. If you have a nice, pretty AM radio, one of those nice ceramic jobs, weren't they gorgeous? It was artwork. You know, the folks who came here from the Alabama Historical Radio Society, I hope some of you have gone up to their building to see how magnificent the art of building radios, just blossomed with so many different styles. Well, I got the word from Gary Richardson that they are going to digitify the AM signal. You won't be able to use those radios anymore. Won't pick up nothing. The whole signal, the whole AM signal is going to be made, I don't know, it's going to be changed for you know who makes those decisions. I didn't make that decision or anything, but there are people who see a market, a new market, sell new AM radios. That would be probably foolhardy. Everything's on your phone. So it's a period that's come and gone, you know what I'm saying? And there were young people I met in Birmingham who were producing their own music on their, what do you call it, iPad? A full studio on an iPad. 10-track studio on your iPad. So, we have to wish them well, and help them with whatever the hell we have, because their world it's coming, it's here. So, did I come close?
Great, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Bob, again for coming and telling us about the Black Radio Museum.
Thank you, Alex.
And thank you all
Thank
for
you
joining
all.
us. Please join me in thanking Bob once more.
And I hope to see everybody this Saturday for the celebration of Black History here at the Archives. And also next Thursday for Food for Thought with Fred Gray. Thank y'all so much.